Hello everyone, I'm Adam Walker. Welcome to Close Reading Poetry. I want to introduce you to 4 devotional poets that I think everyone should read. Devotional poetry is for everyone. There's an idea that only the religious can understand and appreciate devotional poetry. Samuel Taylor Coleridge believed that only an Anglican could really understand George Herbert. And that's not really true. What devotional poetry offers everyone are instances of expressions of complex states of consciousness, of spiritual experience and desire. Certain states that otherwise are very difficult to express in prose. But poetry can do it, as many of the ancient poets have. I think poetry and prayer, poetics and prayer, are in some ways sisters. Because if you look at most of the earliest poetry, it all began in religious rite of different kind. I have 4 poets. 4 very different poets. One, Mary Sidney Herbert, from the Renaissance tradition, who is a Reformed Protestant. Thomas Traherne, who is a mystic poet. Christina Rossetti, who is an Anglican Victorian poet. And Gerard Manley Hopkins, who is a Jesuit Catholic poet of the late Victorian period. In the month of May, I'll be running a course on these 4 devotional poets. I'll circulate readings beforehand on Patreon, and then we'll all gather together on a live call. I'll give a lecture, and then we'll have questions and then discussions, which will involve closely looking at some of these devotional poets that we've read and collaboratively close reading their poems together. Now in June, I will upload the recordings of the lectures themselves, so if you want to just wait for those, that's fine. But here's a brief look at some of these poets. Mary Sidney Herbert was the sister of Sir Philip Sidney, and they both were translating the Psalms together. And what they introduced, what she in particular introduced, was a new kind of devotional lyrical experimentation. The sort of experimentation that influenced George Herbert, Henry Vaughan, and eventually Thomas Traherne. So without Mary Sidney Herbert and her great lyrical art, which is seldom recognized, we wouldn't have many of the devotional forms that we have today. This is her translation of Psalm 102, an exploration of the feeling of despair, of spiritual despair, which is an emotion that the Hebrew Psalms often discuss. And you notice on the page the lineation, the way that the stanzas are grouped by the space, the intervals between, and then are bound together intricately through sound, is a chief characteristic of her art. O Lord, my praying hear. Lord, let my cry come to thine ear. Hide not thy face away, but haste and answer me in this my most miserable day, wherein I pray and cry to thee. Repetition of the vowel sounds all throughout. Of course, we have the rhyme, and repetition of most miserable. What she did was she made them sing to the English heart. And this lyrical experimentation, this innovation that she introduces into the tradition of English devotional lyric poetry, is one of her greatest endowments, and that's what we'll be looking at in the first lecture. Mary Sidney Herbert's Psalm translations, and I will circulate those before our lecture. The other poet is more mystical than biblical. We turn to Thomas Traherne's Eden, for example, which is an exploration of childhood. In many ways, Traherne is a poet of childhood. And we see in this first stanza, we notice the way it looks visually, typographically on the page with delineation, very similar to Mary Sidney Herbert's. And it's because of her, largely, that these later poets were able to give expression to their own experiences in similar ways. Traherne, in the mid to late 17th century, sings, "A learned and a happy ignorance divided me from all the vanity, from all the sloth, care, pain, and sorrow that advance the madness and the misery of men. No error, no distraction I saw soil the earth, or overcloud the sky." He's describing this Edenic state of childhood before he knew the cares of the world. And so Traherne will often look back, as we'll see in his more mystical poems, to this state of childhood, through the sound, through the music of the lines, and also through this strange imagery, which is often mystical. So Traherne is the poet of childhood, of innocence. In fact, he has a poem of innocence. And of course, the title is hearkening back to that archetypal Edenic state, the paradise that was lost. Now, from Traherne, we turn to the 19th century poet Christina Rossetti, and we will discuss her poems for the third week. While Traherne is the poet of childhood, Christina Rossetti's later life sonnets deal with old age, with spiritual maturity even, and some of the dryness that comes in spiritual feeling, states of what might be described as dark nights of the soul. Here's this wonderfully vivid poem called Later Life by Christina Rossetti. Something this foggy day, a something which is neither of this fog nor of today, has set me dreaming of the winds that play past certain cliffs, along one certain beach, and turn the topmost edge of waves to spray. A pleasant pebbly strand, so far away, so out of reach, while quite within my reach, as out of reach as India or Cathay. I am sick of where I am and where I am not. I am sick of foresight and of memory. I am sick of all I have and all I see. I am sick of self, and there is nothing new. O weary, impatient patience of my lot! Thus with myself. How fares it, friends, with you? Just so much to love about this poem. There's something that's eluding the present moment and the present condition. Something far away, almost like Traherne's Eden, but it's a location of a dream state, of this beach, and then this concise description, beautifully vivid image of how a wave, when it's cresting in the wind, will often have this trail of spray, the topmost edge of waves to spray. Of course, the bounding rhythm of that. And this tragic turn here. I am sick of the anaphora, the repetition of that, of all that is. O impatient patience of my lot. A paradox or an oxymoron, we might think, but one well acquainted with a state like this knows exactly what she means. And then she turns it. So it is with me, thus with myself. How fares it, friends, with you? And we'll be talking about how these poems fare with us in our own readings of them and our own experiences. So, Christina Rossetti, poet, I think, of later life, of spiritual maturity, and of certain states of spiritual exhaustion, as we see in this poem. Now from later life, Christina, the poet of age, we turn to the poet of ecstasy, Gerard Manley Hopkins. T.S. Eliot calls him the poet of ecstasy, and you'll see why. This is the poem Inversnade, which is about a stream, or a brook in Scotland. And like Rossetti, who is such a precise metricist, I mean, she is so precise with her art, the way she'll make the meters stumble when she's talking about the hardness of the way, or how she'll delay the volta in her sonnets when she's longing for something that isn't yet fulfilled. So Hopkins will use meter, what he calls sprung meter, the inscape, the oral experience of the poem through rhythm, as a way to represent these spiritual states of elation and excitement. So here's the stream. This darksome burn, horseback brown, has rolled rock high road roaring down. In coop and in comb, the fleece of his foam flutes, and low to the lake falls home. A wind-puff bonnet of fawn froth turns and twindles over the broth of a pool so pitch-black, fell frowning, it rounds and rounds, despair to drowning. degged with dew, dappled with dew, are the groins of the braes that the brook treads through, wiry heath-pack, flitches of fern, and the bead-bonny ash that sits over the burn. What would the world be, once bereft of wet and wildness? Let them be left, oh, let them be left, wildness and wet. Long live the weeds in the wilderness yet. Beautiful poem that you just have to hear. You have to hear. It only works if you hear it. And these states of spiritual ecstasy, of standing outside oneself, of spiritual elation, are just beautifully captured in the rhythm of his poems. Of course, 3 stanzas of this enactment of this exciting stream, and then this philosophical distance which gives way to an utterance of benediction, of blessing. Oh, let them be left. Long live the weeds in the wilderness yet. And it looks like on this website we have an AI analysis of this, which is not totally insufficient, but like all intellectual analyses of poems, and they have something of them that lacks, which is the actual experience which we just heard ourselves. So throughout this next month, in May, we'll be exploring these 4 poems, and I think giving you an interesting insight, one, into the development of English poetry through devotional poetry, but also in exploring how these 4 men and women have contributed and enriched the great lexicon of spiritual experience and expressions of complex states of consciousness, of joy, of depression, of longing, of despair. All of that range we're going to be exploring in this course. So I look forward to seeing those of us who join there in the meetings, and I look forward to hearing you all in the comments in June once these lectures are posted. Thanks for watching, everyone, and until next time.